In a previous episode, we talked a little bit about streams and event processing, but all of those things need to go somewhere into some sort of data persistence or stream processing tool. Perhaps there's one that we can use already built, like Apache Kafka. Let's mash on that. Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode, I am going to talk a little bit about Apache Kafka. So we kind of talked in the previous episode that I hosted, probably not the previous episode in the order on the YouTube channel, but we'll put a link down there, about events and streams, and all of that kind of dovetails nicely into Apache Kafka. So what is this thing? Well, it is basically a high-performance distributed stream processing tool. So what does that mean? It means basically that you can send events to it, and it will save those events for you, and it will save those events in order for you, and it handles all sorts of different stuff around like replication between different regions, keeping events in order, splitting up events across different partitions, and allowing for massive throughput and all of that good stuff. So it has a couple of core concepts that I think it's important to understand. So the first one is event. We talked about event ad nauseum in the last episode. So an event, just in case you happen to have missed it, is just like something that happens in your system. Money is transferred between accounts, cars are turned on, people do events on a website. So all of these events come from somewhere, and those origins are called the producers. So you're going to have one or more producers in your system, and these are just things that create events. So it might be that you have a web application that is producing events. It could be that you have something that imports data from CSV files at a random time that could be producing events. It could be that other events out there in other event systems tie into your system and you get events through those. So it could be that like you have a bridge from Azure Service Bus into Kafka, and when an event is fired on the Service Bus, you're going to end up with that event eventually at some point in Kafka. You also have consumers. So a consumer is something that gets those messages. Now, not every message is necessarily going to be consumed by something, and not every message is necessarily going to be consumed by only one thing. So you would hope that every message is going to be consumed 0 or more times within your system. So a consumer will read these messages. It might update a database table based on the messages. It might send another message. It might perform some action based on those messages. It could be anything. It really comes down to what sort of event is happening in your system and how your system is designed to read those messages. Next within Kafka is the concept of a topic. So a topic is like, what is this message about? Or for Canadian listeners, what is this message about? So it could be something like, these are all the messages related to a specific car or a specific user. And figuring out the division of those is a little bit difficult. Then within a topic, you're going to have one or more partitions. So a partition is just kind of a grouping of messages. And that's important because partitions are how Kafka scales out. So if you're sending all of your messages from a topic, or all of your messages to a topic to one partition, then it's very likely that partition is going to become overloaded with a huge number of messages. So you ideally want to split these things up and split them up in a way that is sensible to the people consuming those messages. So I have some examples here of what you might have here. So let's say that we are building some sort of like a vehicle monitoring system. So we've got something that we're plugging into somebody's car and is monitoring stuff that's happening on it. So you might have them like open the car door, sit in the car, turn the car on, and those are 3 events that happen inside this vehicle. And all of these, due to the cheap nature of sensors now, are things that are going to be logged somewhere in a system. So when you're sending these events, the people who are interested in those are probably going to be interested in what vehicle had these events happen on them. So you might send all of those events to a partition for that vehicle ID. So as a consumer, I can go and say, all right, I'm going to find Simon's vehicle and I want to know all the events that occurred on Simon's vehicle from the beginning of time till now, or from a week last Thursday to the next day. And Kafka will hand you over a bunch of events from that time frame, whatever it was that you specified, so that you can then go and do whatever decision making that you need based on that.
Simon, the partition IDs then, are they quite granular, like almost a unique ID on an entity?
They certainly could be, and based on like an entity. So if you're doing something like event sourcing for an entity, then absolutely your partition ID could be an entity ID. So you might create a new entity, give it a unique identifier, maybe a GUID of some sort, and then all the subsequent events for that would go to that partition. And then when you need to figure out what the current state is of that entity, you would go and you would load everything from that partition and into a memory, and then you would be able to reconstruct the current state of that entity because it has all the events on it. So it could be that. You might also have something that is a little bit less granular. So let's say we have thousands of vehicles out there, but we're really interested in when they enter some sort of geo-fenced area. So maybe like how many of these vehicles are going to Superstore to buy something. Superstore's pretty Canadian-centric. Safeway. Everywhere has a Safeway. So you want to know how many people have gone into Safeway. So you have an ID for Safeway, and every time a vehicle enters that, then we're going to produce another event on there and partition it by the area ID. So now we're going to get all of the events that our vehicles have come into this area. Now, a lot of people go to Safeway, so you might actually want to partition that one a little bit more, depending on how you want to consume it. As a consumer, if I'm interested just in what vehicles have gone to Safeway on Thursday, then this kind of middle one here is my best bet, right? Because then I'm just getting all the vehicle IDs that entered an area. But if my interest is a little bit more specific, let's say I'm the police and I'm interested in when did a specific vehicle enter an area, then we might have partitioned these events by area ID and vehicle ID. So you can come up with these kind of joint IDs or joint partitions such that you get two different things in there. So when you're querying for this, you would just say like, hey, here's the area ID dash, here's the vehicle ID, that's the partition giving you all the events on that. And this partition might actually end up being empty, and that's fine. You just
so even for like a given event, you might end up with multiple partitions.
Right. So that's the interesting bit, is that because people are consuming these messages in different ways, you might actually end up writing multiple events out to different partitions when something happens to this vehicle. So in this case, we would probably end up writing out two different events here for vehicles entered area. One which was to a partition for just the area, and one which was a partition for the combination of area ID and vehicle ID. And then just as another example here, it might be something like for a bank account, you might partition everything by just an account ID, and you would have a mixture of different kinds of events that would come into this bank account. So on the bank account, you would probably have something like a debit and a credit, or something even more granular than that. So you might have like debits, bank fees, credits, wire transfers, all sorts of different things that would happen. But each one of these is basically, you're just going to serialize it into some sort of format. JSON is, of course, always popular these days. And you would just drop it out kind of into this bank account partition so that you could read that back later. Okay, so we've gone through that. This is just kind of like the baseline for if you want to set up Kafka on your system. So in our next episode, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through setting up Kafka just in some Docker containers and writing some events to it and reading some events from it in .NET. So thank you everybody for joining us on today's episode. Remember to like, comment, and share, and we'll see everybody next week.
Bye.
Bye.